I said, we don't know what happened entirely in front of here, why police ultimately decided to stop them from marching. And as I said, several people now have been arrested, and we're waiting to hear more from the police here.
All right, Shimon Peralta-Quipez on the streets of Louisville, Kentucky. We will continue to bring you scenes from there as they develop. Let's bring in right now retired Los Angeles Police Department Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. Sergeant Dorsey, thanks for joining us. When you look at the clashes that we've seen between police and protesters, is there a way for police to handle what seemed, or at least Shimon is describing, a almost entirely peaceful protest until the police came in and blocked it, without making it even more tense? In other words, is it normal just to stop protesters from walking, or not?
Well, listen, certainly there's a way for officers to handle protesters without being confrontational. Police officers are taught to use only that force necessary to overcome resistance and or gain compliance. And so understand that there's a segment of police officers out there who live for protests. They want to engage. They want to get involved in what, I've heard referred to on LAPD as stick time, because there's no use of force report that you have to create once you engage a protester in that way. And so there are those who live for that on both sides, right? There are antagonists on both sides.
What was your response to what we heard from the Attorney General of Kentucky today and the grand jury in terms of the Breonna Taylor case?
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm a realist, and so I deciphered all of his doublespeak and code talk, and we know that this is really a non-indictment. It has nothing to do with Breonna Taylor. This was about Officer Brett Hankinson firing rounds into the next-door neighbor's apartment. It had nothing to do with the murder of Breonna Taylor. Those officers, according to the Attorney General, were justified in that use of force. Now, I don't know how 16 shots fired by one is justified use of force when officers are taught to fire 2 shots in rapid succession and then reassess the threat. But nonetheless, that was his story, and he's sticking to it. And I found it offensive that he would call out celebrities and alleged influencers, because he too says he's a black man, and somehow celebrities can't speak for Kentuckians, but as a black man, he can speak for us. And so I understand he's skin folk, not kinfolk. He doesn't speak for me.
How do you begin to repair relations between communities and their police force when there is clearly so much anger and so much distrust?
Well, you have to first be honest, and I haven't heard any of that. Even with this $12 million settlement in the case of Breonna Taylor, there are all these faux reforms, things that were only promises, not anything that really they have to do. The city council must approve much of this. And then let's not forget that there's no admission of wrongdoing. And so, listen, if he didn't do anything wrong, I don't even know why Hankerson was fired in the first place. They came up with this no-knock warrant. You need a supervisor to sign off on it. That should have already been in existence. And so everything that they pretend to put forward really doesn't affect patrol officers, me, when I'm in uniform day to day in my patrol car. It won't stop. And we know that because we saw Derek Chauvin sit and have us watch him for 8 minutes and 46 seconds on the neck of George Floyd and dared us to do anything about it.
Do you think the other 2 officers should have been charged?
Well, absolutely. They were there, and one of them was a sergeant. And so I hold that sergeant to a higher standard. But we've got the Attorney General saying that it was justified. Now, they're giving their truth. I don't know that it's the truth. They're saying that Breonna, her boyfriend, fired the first shot. I don't know that that's true. We know that they'll lie. They have. They said that they rendered aid. They said that there were no cameras. They said that they announced. And there's been evidence contrary to all of that. And so now we're stuck with their version of events. And that's what happens when the police kill us. There's only one version to tell, and that's the one they put forth. I'm not buying it.
The Attorney General of Kentucky is starting up this task force to review the process for securing and executing search warrants in Kentucky. So that appears some sort of tacit acknowledgement that something went wrong, in addition to the $12 million payment to the family of Breonna Taylor and the firing of Officer Hankinson. But based on the charges, no one is actually being held responsible for her death.
Absolutely. I mean, Hankerson is being indicted because he fired rounds with wanton disregard into a neighbor's apartment. It has nothing to do, no mention of Breonna Taylor. And so he gets no brownie points for starting a task force where they're going to look at and review things that should have already been in place. And then when they violate their own policies and procedures, they'll tell us, that's not what you saw. That's not what we did. Carry on.
The governor of Kentucky wants the Attorney General to make all of the evidence in the case public. Governor Andy Beshear, who's a Democrat, says the public deserves to know the facts. The Attorney General's a Republican. Do you think that would be enough to calm those who are angry over the lack of charges for Breonna Taylor's death, releasing the evidence?
I mean, listen, release the evidence if you want to or not. What families want, what everyone seems to be most upset about is a failure to hold police officers accountable when they do things that are contradictory to training and or law. So make it available or not, but hold the officers accountable. And we know that that won't be happening in this case because we've already heard from the AG that in his mind, 16 shots through a closed door or an open door if they just entered is somehow justified. It's offensive.
Cheryl Dorsey, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. More breaking news up next. A new CNN poll shows 6 in 10 Americans are not likely to get what they want when it comes to efforts to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court. Plus, what Senator Rand Paul said about coronavirus that Dr. Anthony Fauci could not let go uncorrected. Stay with us.
In preparation for the U.S. elections, Facebook has taken critical steps to secure their platforms and provide transparency. They've more than tripled their safety and security teams to 35,000 people, implemented 5-step ad verification, and launched a new voting information center. Learn more about how Facebook is preparing at fb.com/about/elections. That's fb.com/about/elections.
We also have some breaking news for you right now in our politics lead. Brand new CNN polls. It's all about who the American people think should pick the next Supreme Court justice. Most Americans, 59%, say that the president who was elected in November should nominate the replacement for the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's compared to 41% who say President Trump should make the appointment now. Let's break that down by party. 97% of Democrats say the newly elected president should make the decision, compared to 59% of independents and all the way down to 17% of Republicans. In March 2016, which was obviously much earlier in that election year, the public felt the opposite. 57% of Americans said Obama should then have been the one to fill the vacancy after the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. The new CNN poll also gauges the public's opinion of the current court. 38% say President Trump's appointments have made the court worse. 29% say his appointments have made the court better. 32% say the president's appointments have made no difference at all. Now, on to the health lead. The country's leading health experts under fire today during a hearing over the handling of the pandemic that has left already more than 200,000 Americans dead. Senators questioning the CDC director over trust issues in his agency, challenging the FDA chief on safety concerns surrounding an eventual vaccine. And at one point, the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, in a passionate defense, shut down what he described as wrong conclusions being drawn by Republican Senator Rand Paul.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repetitively in the past.
This as sources tell CNN that Dr. Deborah Birx might be on her way out as coordinator of the White House coronavirus task force because she's, quote, distressed over the direction of the task force. CNN's Nick Watt now reports.
New York, once the world's hotspot, today the most heated topic during COVID-19 response hearings on Capitol Hill.
How could we possibly be jumping up and down and saying, oh, Governor Cuomo did a great job? He had the worst death rate in the world.
No, you misconstrued that, Senator, and you've done that repetitively in the past. They got hit very badly. They've made some mistakes.
Dr. Anthony Fauci
now,
bit back
if
at
you look
Kentucky
at
Senator Rand Paul.
They're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
This pandemic now so politicized, the FDA commissioner also felt he had to say this.
Decisions to authorize or approve any such vaccine or therapeutic will be made by the dedicated career staff at FDA through our thorough review processes, and science will guide our decisions. FDA will not permit any pressure from anyone to change that.
What stood out to me is that so many of the questions were about trust. And this is a position that I could not have imagined that we would be in several months ago.
Today, Johnson & Johnson begins global phase 3 trials of its potential vaccine. The company says it could be ready for FDA review early next year. And this is key. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, unlike the others currently in phase 3 trials in the US, is a single dose, so easier, quicker to deploy.
In the end, FDA will not authorize or approve a vaccine that we would not feel comfortable giving to our families.
Meantime, nationally, we seem stuck at around 40,000 new confirmed cases a day. 2 weeks ago, just 9 states were seeing average new case counts rise. Today, that number is 22. In Kentucky, that average daily case count tripled since midsummer. A 36-year-old nurse named Cassie among the recently infected.
I want to be upset. I want to be angry. I want my daughter healthy.
Nationally, death rates were falling, but
that decline in deaths that we were seeing in late August is no longer being sustained.
We just passed 200,000 dead in America. Could be over 300,000 by year's end.
Now, one of the big, still unanswered questions is how safe or dangerous are airplanes? Well, the CDC says they have now identified 1,600 flights between January and August that had an infected person on board. And using a kind of 6-foot radius rule, they've calculated that nearly 11,000 people were potentially exposed. But the data on how many people have actually caught COVID-19 on an airplane is patchy and therefore inconclusive. So the bottom line is we still do not know how safe or dangerous airplane travel is right now. Jake?
All right, Nick Watt in California, thank you so much. Let's bring in CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, let's delve deeper into an issue here that was part of the exchange between Dr. Fauci and Senator Paul. Let's play a brief part of that clip.
They're no longer having the pandemic because they have enough immunity in New York City to actually stop.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
Beyond Dr. Fauci's frustration with Rand Paul, who says things that are at odds with science all the time, what's your reaction to this herd immunity argument that some conservatives are making?
Yeah, I mean, there's no herd immunity. I mean, you know, to get to herd immunity, and there's ways of calculating this, Jake. So if you have a contagious virus, something that spreads from one person, in this case to 2 or 3 people, that's what they call this R0 factor, you can calculate that you'd need to get to around 60 to 70%, really around 67%, 2/3 of the country would need to have antibodies to get to herd immunity. And the fact that Rand Paul is saying, 22% after he just heard that was the number in New York could be enough it doesn't make any sense. It flies in the face of the science. And again, these are objective things you can actually calculate. Dr. Fauci is very frustrated. I think in part, Rand Paul is a doctor. These are things that we do learn to sort of how you calculate these things. I think that was part of his frustration. But also this idea that this is not a strategy to let the natural infection run through a society. With 10% of the country roughly that's been infected right now, we've already had 200,000 dead. So you can imagine if you just let that equation play out, that'll turn into 2 million potentially, or between 1.5 million to 2 million dead. So I think that's really what the frustration was about.
Yeah, we should point out Dr. Rand Paul is an eye doctor. He's not an infectious disease expert. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut, asked the CDC director about a testing guidance that a lot of people think would decrease the number of tests out there. Let's play some of that exchange.
There was no intent of this guidance to decrease testing. On the contrary, the intent was to link testing and to drive a public health action. And again, the manner in which it was interpreted by a number of individuals was such that it didn't accomplish that goal.
I think I'm over my time. This has just been dizzying for public health professionals. They're just awaiting the next correction.
So was the issue here that the guidance was misinterpreted, or was the guidance really going to decrease testing?
I don't think it was misinterpreted, Jake, and I think it would have led to a decrease in testing. Whether or not that was the motivation,